Pretty newsworthy Wednesday for the Ohio State Buckeyes. A great day, in fact, with three players that I think everybody that was hopeful they would return have announced for sure they are coming back for the 2024 season. And on top of that, some coaching news that dropped earlier this afternoon as well, both a subtraction and an addition. We're going to get into all of it. Good off-season Wednesday for the Ohio State Buckeyes. It's coming up next on Buckeye Breakdown.
We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Anthony Moeglin and Brendan Gulick with you on this off-season, early January Wednesday evening, and a day where certainly probably got a little bit more news today than we would have expected. Not that the news was a huge surprise, but a good news day for Ohio State. If you're just coming around and you haven't learned yet what's going on with the Bucks, Denzel Burke is coming back for another year, Jordan Hancock returning, and Donovan Jackson on the offensive line is also coming back to the Buckeyes next year. In addition to that, Parker Fleming, the special teams coach, has been let go, and the team is bringing back Matt Guerreri to coach safeties after Perry Eliano was not retained last week. So just straight off the top, news dump Wednesday. Anthony, what are your thoughts on a day that certainly had some big headlines?
Yeah, very thoughtful of them to do it on Wednesday afternoon. I mean, thanks, guys. But it came in two waves, right? The first one being Denzel Burke coming back, and then the second one being Jordan Hancock being the headliner there with Donovan Jackson as well. But I think it's such a big deal for this Ohio State team because, the bar has been set, right? It happened on Monday night, and they're chasing that. And the fact that, this defense, and we heard it immediately after the Cotton Bowl with Jack Sawyer. He's like, he had hinted at it in that post-game press conference. He's like, we have unfinished business. And this group of now seniors came in and they've been very vocal, Brendan, about setting a legacy and leaving this program with, doing what they set out to do. We talk about it every year, Big Ten championship, beating the team up north and going into the national championship and trying to do so. So this group has been very vocal about it, and you love that. Hey, it's not just words; they're backing it up, and the boys are starting to come back and rally back because it's got the potential, if this keeps up, to be a pretty exciting offseason down in Columbus.
I don't know that Michigan winning a national championship changed anybody's mind. Correct. Maybe we'll learn that somewhere along the way. I get the impression that these decisions were probably made aside from that. But I do think it kind of bolsters the case of everybody saying, look, we take some pride here in not losing that game, and we're not going to lose 4 years in a row. And we're here to get it done flat out. Right. And in some regards, man, like it's what they said last year. And it's got to be different this year. How's it going to be different? What's going to be different? Well, they've got to figure those things out. There are more changes coming on the offensive side of the ball. Ryan Day has reportedly, said, look, I'm going to go get an offensive coordinator, and he's going to evaluate the whole offensive staff the same way a couple of years ago Jim Knowles came in and basically had a chance to say, keeping you, not keeping you, keeping you, not keeping you, right? With the exception of Brian Hartline, in addition to Ryan Day, obviously is not going anywhere. So there are going to be more changes, but I think just purely for a second, focusing on these guys, I don't know if you can pinpoint a better defense in the country. And I know, like, in the Ohio State circles, you often get some hyperbole, right? You get some pie in the sky thinking. Like, I think statistically and from an experience perspective, from a draft perspective, draft caliber, I can't imagine a better defense returning next year than what Ohio State's going to have because of how well they played the last 2 years and how many of these guys are still here building on it. But to your point, there is going to be a little bit of turnover because you don't have Mike Hall and you don't have Tommy Eichenberg next year. Mm-hmm. And just those two guys alone are going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, and you're going to have to replace Steel Chambers as well on at
Yeah,
the linebacker
sure.
level too. So it's like, hey, you're going to have to change those guys. But other than that, and honestly, like you could find that there are some guys that are in the ranks that are coming up that could potentially play a little bit better than what we saw from the linebacker core. Obviously, they were great, but you never know how that's going to shake out. But you hit the nail right on the head. Like this was a top 5 defense last year, and you're returning like everybody from it, which is so exciting. And they can continue to get better, but it's going to be. It was hard to move the football on them last year. I don't really know who's going to be able to attack this group through the air. They're going to have not only a group of defensive backs that are the most athletic in the country, but the most veteran group in the country who've seen it all, who've been there, who are all potential first or second day draft picks in now 2025. So it's like, hey, they're just reloading and they're bringing all these guys back and trying to it almost feels like they're assembling the Infinity Rings from that I don't forget the movie. It's slipping my mind right now, but they're assembling them all. And they're ready to go because this defense was great last year and is going to continue to just get even better and better.
So Jack Sawyer and some combination of guys are going to be on the edge. Could it be JT Tuimoloau or Kenyatta Jackson or Caden Curry, whatever it's going to look like? Obviously, we're still waiting to hear from JT. But with Tyleik Williams coming back, that's huge. Ty Hamilton will be back. That's really important. Cody Simon will anchor the linebackers. Obviously, he wasn't really a starter with as much as Tommy and Steele played, but Cody got a ton of reps and clearly has the respect of this coaching staff. Beyond him, is it CJ Hicks? Is it Gabe Powers? Is it somebody else that'll come in and play that other linebacker spot? We'll find out. The Denzel Burke thing for me was probably the biggest one because I think Ohio State, well, first of all, with the way he played this year, you saw really, really high-level stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But Davison Igbinosun played pretty well, and I think we saw enough from Jermaine Matthews that kind of led me to believe, if Denzel Burke decides to go, that would stink, but you can probably absorb that a little bit, at least, for guys that are projected to be starters. But now you bring back a guy that, obviously is a bona fide day one starter and will allow you to keep building depth. Matthews is going to play next year for sure. What the Buckeyes do in the back end of the defense is going to be really interesting to watch. Malik Hartford, you would think, is going to see a lot of time. How does Sonny Styles fit into this picture and specifically at what position? Because it's becoming pretty clear you can't really not have 6 on the field. But I think it'll be year 3 with Jim Knowles. You saw incredible leaps year 1 to year 2. And with so many of these guys that took those big steps forward this past season, with so many of those guys coming back, it's going to take a lot of pressure off of what we assume is going to be Will Howard leading the Buckeye offense.
And we saw it last year, speaking to that offensive point. It's going to take some time, whether we like it or not. You're going to have a new quarterback. You're going to have some movement on the offensive line. Obviously, you're going to have some firepower in the backfield as well. But it's going to take a couple weeks, right? And that's just something we have to come to terms with. But when you have a defense that's been together, just like everything you just said right there, you have that defense that can be, just frankly, win you football games. And I agree with you that Denzel Burke is the one that kind of piques my interest because not only what the things you just mentioned, but because he became like the leader of that defense. And it's very rare that you see that from the cornerback position. Oftentimes in a locker room and on a team, the cornerbacks are like the wide receivers, right? They dress the nicest. They're the most athletic. They don't really mix it up like vocally, in front of the team. But that's not the case with Denzel Burke. Like I remember one week sticks out to me, and it was obviously the Michigan week. And I remember his first press conference on either that Tuesday or the Monday or whatever it may have been, but it was a totally different tone. It was like, I'm not messing around. Like, I'm going to answer your questions very bluntly and right to the point. And then you had mentioned you were down there like, hey, this dude's on a different level right now. And it's like, hey, that type of leadership goes now above and beyond. So now you're bringing him back. He's the best athlete. Now he's veteran and he's the leader of this team, and they respond to him. So him coming back, I think for me is big, not only for the defense, but for the team as a whole.
I don't know if it got talked enough about with Michigan and Washington playing in this national championship game, those two teams were pretty veteran-laden, borderline old college football teams.
Yeah.
And, in today's day and age where there's so much movement in the portal and so many factors at play, and you're still leaning on guys that have done it to go out and keep proving it, the veteran presence for Ohio State's going to matter to the point where, look, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here because we got to see what Will Howard's going to look like. I don't know how much in spring ball we're really going to be able to dissect this thing. But Will Howard's at least won a conference championship. He's a guy that's played a good bit of football, and the coaching staff picked him, right? So I said a couple of weeks ago, I would be surprised if Will Howard came to campus. But Ohio State wants his leadership in the locker room. And so you got to trust that Ryan Day knows what he's doing with quarterbacks because he's been pretty good at it throughout his career. So I guess I'm looking at this group and saying, hey, a bunch of really ticked off, motivated guys that have something to prove that are choosing, hey, we're not going to go to the NFL quite yet. This means something to us to get this right, to go beat Michigan, to try to win a Big Ten championship. And by the way, you got 4 other teams that are coming into the league, at least a couple of which right away are going to be really impactful. Oregon right now in the way too early preseason polls, they're top 5. Yeah. Washington obviously is going to look different next year without Penix and without some, Odunze and some of these other guys that were really good for them. Sure. They just came off a national championship appearance. USC is recruiting at a pretty good level. I assume UCLA is going to be able to figure it out. So I don't want to say Ohio State's going to just cakewalk through its season, and obviously they got to go play in Eugene. But there is a piece of this that I look at it and go hey, we really could see Ohio State at the same point of the season when they're going into their 12th game, sitting at 11-0, if they can, go do what we've seen them do before.
Yeah, and it's the defense is going to keep them in it early. Early in the year, it's not going to look great, and we'll see with those additions. We may have gotten some help down in Alabama with what just broke about.
I was just going to say, if your program had any news to dump today was the day.
Today was the day.
It would have gotten swallowed up.
So we may be getting some luck. I'm seeing that Dan Lanning is continuing to be linked to that job. We'll see. Obviously, it broke an hour and a half ago. So just reading whatever on X. But maybe that does, maybe that doesn't. But you're right. The Big Ten is going to look a ton different. And, it's really impressive that I'm just shocked by it. Not shocked in a bad way, but just shocked that these guys are coming back. How many times do we see it where they're like, hey, it all means something. We want to build a legacy and beat the team up north. And then 2 weeks later, they think about it, talk to their people, and then they declare for the draft. You see it. We've seen it for the last however many years, but this group's different, and it really, truly does mean something to them to be Ohio State football players and to leave their mark on this program. And this is a good way to start it. This defense is going to be something that we've never seen before. It's going to be awesome to watch next year.
So I realize this is not a Alabama podcast here, but with Nick Saban retiring, I also have seen more conversation on social media around Dan Lanning than anybody else. But I half wondered, I haven't seen this anywhere, but I half wonder, do you think Deion Sanders makes a push for that job?
Man, it would make.
I don't know if they would want him.
Yeah,
but that seems like the kind of job Deion would be all about.
And you can't argue either. Him and Saban are boys. Aflac would love that for sure. Those commercials would be out of control. But there's a bunch of names out there. You could toss them around, all day long. But that Deion name down in Alabama that'd be something. That would truly.
Yeah, everybody's talking about Dabo and would Kirby Smart go back? I don't see any reason why Kirby Smart would go to Alabama. There's no reason for him to leave Georgia. He's got enough staying power at Georgia. He could name his price if he needed to.
Lane Kiffin, maybe.
Lane Kiffin, I guess I could see a little bit of that.
Yeah.
He's certainly one of the more fun characters in college football. The Dabo thing is interesting. It's such a good run for such a long time and finally has one, quote unquote bad year. Is that the right fit for him? I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do, but it will be weird to not see Nick Saban on the sideline next year. That's for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And even more of the fallout, like with the way college football is now, how's that roster going to change?
Well, and so that's the right thing to bring up here, right? Because, within like an hour of Nick Saban saying, "Hey, I'm retiring," I would argue their best recruit, Ryan Williams, a terrific receiver, is decommitting from Alabama. Now, does he ultimately renege on that and decide, with whomever ends up being the coach, does he want to go back to Tuscaloosa? I guess he could do that if he wanted to. Obviously, quite a bit of reason why, he could look at Ohio State. I'm sure the Buckeyes would be willing to have a conversation with him. But I don't know if that's the right fit or not. But again, like those are the kinds of players. First of all, he didn't sign anything with NIL. Williams didn't, so he could leave. The players that are currently on the Alabama roster, I think have like a 30-day window to make that decision. Yeah. What would be frustrating is the guys who early enrolled and have already started classes. That's a whole different wrinkle.
Yeah, it's a tough deal. The layers of this are all, as you kind of peel them back, you're like, dang, there's so much involved with it. But, with him retiring, that definitely is going to send waves through, not just through the Alabama program, like nationally, as that roster, all those guys decide to make their own decisions. Does it benefit Ohio State in the long run? Potentially. Like if there is one roster that you would like to go pick from, that'd be one of them, right? Like that would be one. And you get some pretty darn good players if you get them to flip over from Bama for sure.
So this show is a little bit more focused on players, and we'll do more on coaches along the way. But at least worth bringing up that we got the news today that I think a lot of Ohio State fans, frankly, were hoping for. I don't want to pretend to know the details of Parker Fleming's contract situation. Perhaps maybe Ryan Day had already made up his mind that he was going to move on, but waited for a certain date, certain threshold, so that it would save them some money. I don't know. I mean, that happens pretty regularly in college football, where coaches will wait till a certain date and it might save them, an extra couple $100,000 or whatever it might be. Even for programs as big as Ohio State that, are printing money, you still got to be fiscally responsible. So maybe that was the reason for the delay, just speculation on my part. But ultimately, I think that was a move that needed to be made. And I'm, again, I'm not glad to see anybody lose their job, but I think it's better for Ohio State football that they look for a new special teams coach.
Yeah, it was every week there was problems. It started from the last couple of years, honestly, but it's just stuff that, we even watched in the Cotton Bowl. The special teams was just letting you down. And as you see, special teams, yes, it's a third of the game that oftentimes from a fan perspective gets looked over, right? They're going to punt, you get up, you go refill your drink, you go fill up your chips, and then all of a sudden it's a flip of possession. But it's so huge in many types of football games. And, it can be the difference when you start getting into these highly leveraged games, which we are going to have next year with the influx of the new Big Ten teams, that special teams is important. And this is a good move for Ohio State. This has to be, it can't be a third of the game that you just disregard. This needs to be a third where you're elite at, just like Ohio State is at every other, on offense and defense.
This team obviously still has some guys that have not made a public announcement on whether they're coming back or going. I don't know that we need to assume that everybody has to make some kind of an announcement, although it's certainly helpful when they do. Like, for example, TreVeyon Henderson. I think everybody in the world is like, well, is TreVeyon going to go pro or is he coming back? I mean, he's got eligibility. I saw somebody on Twitter said today, like, hey, TreVeyon was in class with me today. Take that for whatever it's worth. Like, maybe Trey doesn't feel like he needs to go on Twitter and say, hey, everybody, I'm coming back. Like,
maybe he's just at workouts. Maybe he's just at workouts tomorrow.
Whatever the case is, we haven't officially heard word from TreVeyon Henderson, from Emeka Egbuka. Marvin Harrison Jr. technically hasn't declared for the draft yet. And we haven't heard from JT Tuimoloau. I think those are the guys that are most pressing in terms of who we're waiting on. I can't really envision a world where Ohio State's not a top 12 team and in the playoffs, frankly, any year, but certainly with the talent they've got coming back on defense. Even if you lose a game in the regular season, you're not going to convince me that there's going to be 11 better teams than Ohio State next year as long as they stay healthy, because what we've seen from this group is already pretty high level stuff. So, the quest toward a national championship is, that much more real at this point in the year this year than it was the last couple of years coming off losses to Michigan, because the door to get into that tournament is a lot wider now. And so while I think there's still a ton of focus on beat Michigan and win a Big Ten championship, I think there is probably a part of this for all of the guys choosing to come back that are draft eligible, that they recognize, what, we're probably going to have a chance to play for a national championship next year. So give that a shot, because you can probably get in the playoff.
It's a really good point, and one that, frankly, I hadn't thought about, right? Like that's a huge, huge factor in it, because you're not fighting to get one of 4 spots. You're fighting to get one of 12. And, it'll have that NFL feel to it next year, where as long as you get in the dance, you have a chance, and anything can really go once you get into the playoffs. So you make a really good point that, hey, this, along with all those other things, you can improve your draft stock, get back for another year of NIL money, which is probably pretty good. And then also too, the door to get into that playoff is, 3 times wider now. So you got to feel really good, at least about that, for Ohio State.
All right. So we got a couple of comments here that were ultimately questions for you. Do you agree that the Big Ten is the deepest roster of highly talented coaches? I hope we can retain everyone with Saban leaving. Lots of coaches are hearing their ears ring. And then the question followed up with that, Anthony, what do you think about the coaches in the Big Ten? So on the spot, what do you think?
Yeah, I think pretty darn good, right? Obviously starting at the top with Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh, like that's pretty good. And now adding the West Coast guys, now you have Lincoln Riley, obviously, and you got Dan Lanning at this point. I think that it's very good. I think that across the board from a head coach's perspective, it's really, really good. And the
look at what Kalen DeBoer did in Washington
in
such a short time.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I mean, he was at Indiana a couple years ago. If you want something fun, go look up his entire coaching career. Everywhere he's gone, he's just been a winner, like and a big time winner too. And it happens like quickly for him. So he's fantastic. Like there's so many good ones. Even James Franklin, right? He's in that like second tier, but Penn State's a great program. I think that the Big Ten coaching is fantastic. Now, what I would say is that it's on the same par as Alabama. So it's like, hey, I in my opinion, there's a number of those top programs in the Big Ten that are like, I'm not leaving to go to Alabama. Obviously money talks, but sure. I think that they can. The programs in the Big Ten can now compete with the height, I guess, of the Alabama program. So I wouldn't be too concerned about these guys leaving.
Well, and look, we didn't really get a ton of dialogue about this in this national championship game. At least I didn't catch it. I realize Washington's still part of the Pac-12 right now, but essentially you got 2 schools that are going to both be in the Big Ten next year that were playing for a national championship. I felt like when we heard Alabama and Georgia playing in the national championship, it was just an all SEC championship game over and over and over and over again, shoved down your throat that this is an SEC title game. And I didn't really hear a whole lot of that about the Big Ten, in this year's version of the national championship game. But the reality is, I think there are several programs in both leagues that probably feel like they got a pretty darn good shot of making the playoff next year. Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, as they're currently constructed, and frankly, even Penn State. All 4 of those schools should feel like, yeah, we can absolutely be a top 12 team in the country next year and give it a shot. Yeah, and in the SEC, like Georgia and presumably Alabama, I can't imagine that they're going to just suddenly crumble just because Saban's not going to be the coach next year. And you've got Ole Miss is really good. Missouri's graduating some key guys, but still a good team. LSU, really, really talented. They got a super young quarterback coming in. I'll be really interested to see if Colin Hurley plays right away. He's a really young kid who reclassified out of Jacksonville, but he is incredibly talented as a young quarterback. Is he the guy next year after Jaden Daniels? I don't know, but there are certainly going to be plenty of rosters in both those conferences that feel like, yeah, we're good enough to win a national championship. And now that the doors are open, let's see where we can do it.
I'll tell you what, some of the photos I saw rolling around social media the past couple of days of what a potential 12-team playoff would look like is just so exciting. It's just it's like, this is so cool. And the fact that the first round is played at the higher seeds home school, like, could you imagine a playoff game at the Shoe? Like, that'd be off the charts cool. And so that we could do a whole show on how that's going to look, but there's so many teams out there that like now have that belief, because we've said it, you and I have, beat the horse pretty good by now, but like a 14 playoff with 5 major conferences is dumb, to just in principle to begin with. And then now that we're opening it up to, you can afford to have a loss or 2 in the regular season and still get in, feels pretty good. So, with the way that that's setting up for next year is pretty sweet.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, any final thoughts on the player personnel news of the day?
Yeah, we'll see what they drop tomorrow at noon. Like, hopefully more good things. No, it's awesome. This is it's the double-edged sword of this college football world. Oftentimes we see it in the NFL. Like, a lot of times, a really fun part of the year is seeing where these new pieces are going to be and seeing how these teams are going to construct themselves. Obviously, it's a different college football landscape, but it is really cool to see how they're building these rosters and how all these transfer portals and guys coming back, going to the draft, really are going to have a direct impact on a lot of these teams next year.
It'll be a ton of fun to follow. There's plenty of news still to come here in the month of January. I'm sure of it, even if it's just on the coaching front, but we've obviously got more players. We're waiting to hear back on their decisions as well. Certainly expecting Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to the NFL. I don't know why he wouldn't, but it's the NIL world, man. I don't know. I mean, it's possible.
For Marvin, I saw him slotted to go to Arizona, which would be perfect.
Yeah, I would think so.
Perfect. Anyway,
I would think so. We'll find out. We'll have it all covered for you, of course. Here, part of our coverage on Buckeyes Now. You can check us out, BuckeyesNow.com, for all the latest news and info on the team. And please subscribe to the YouTube channel and like this video if you wouldn't mind. Helps our coverage along the way. For Anthony Moeglin, I'm Brendan Gulick. See you soon. The Buckeyes get Donovan Jackson, Jordan Hancock, Denzel Burke, all back for 2024.